Okay, so here we go. This is a new recording for Module 6. And I want to begin with this idea that we are bringing up critiques of consequentialism. Now, we have seen criticisms or objections to consequentialism before. If you remember, there are the three main objections. Now, before I dive into this new set of objections to consequentialism, that I will use to introduce virtue ethics, let me just remind you that there is a difference between making an objection to something and saying that the objection is justified or is serious and being able to answer the objection. I think there is some confusion on this point. I have read some papers where some people seem to think that the objection to the objection from expediency is a major objection because it is just true that utilitarians condone murder, genocide, and all manner of immorality. This is wrong. This is not accurate. Okay? So there's a difference between saying there's an objection to consequentialism, it's a serious objection, and a very different claim. There is no response to the objection because the objection is just is just pointing to an unacceptable feature of the theory. Now, you have seen the objection from expediency. There's a reason I'm bringing it up now. I don't know if you've noticed this. I hope you have. The objection from expediency comes up in the context of slavery, Act Utilitarian Frenchman. Mill discusses it in terms of lying, etc. Now, there are objections like that, which are kind of serious and kind of important, not just kind of, it's actually very important, but it also can be taken by utilitarians as a point to improve or develop their theory or to clarify what their theory is about. And that's precisely what Mill, Bales, and Hare did in the lessons that we've seen. Now, some objections can be used as a basis for explaining more about the theory, for developing the theory further. That's what I'm saying. There are some objections that lead us to a different direction, and I'm going to talk about two such objections now. So the two objections are associated with these two thinkers. The first one, the book here is by Bernard Williams. I'll take up that objection first. Williams is very famous for many things, and one of them is writing a critique of consequentialism. The other criticism of consequentialism, of utilitarianism, comes from Philippa Foot, among other philosophers. So Philippa Foot, Judith Jarvis Thomson, GEM, Anscombe, they are all objecting to consequentialism, and they are coming from the perspective of virtue, which is our second theory. So let's dive right in to the objection posed by Williams. So Williams says, and I'll read this quote, he says, utilitarianism, properly understood and consistently carried through, is the distinctive way of looking at human action and morality. The first question for philosophy is not, do you agree with utilitarianism's answer? But do you really accept utilitarianism's way of looking at the question? Right? So this is actually a very important point, namely that if you want to object to utilitarianism, don't look at their specific judgments on cases, because if you look at their specific judgments on cases, actual cases in the real world, like making contributions to charity, saving a drowning child, telling the truth, cultivating the habit of honesty, slavery in Juba, the Act Utilitarian Frenchman, the judgments on those cases are going to be sound and actually very sophisticated, especially if you go to writers such as Hare and Bales. So you're not going to catch the utilitarian at giving you objectionable answers. So Williams is actually saying, set aside the objection from expediency. The objection from expediency just focuses your attention on utilitarianism's answers to specific cases to specific issues. So a more radical critique is to ask, do you really agree with the way utilitarians look at morality itself? Do you really agree with the way that utilitarianism looks at human action, looks at us, human beings, and looks at the world? You see, here is Williams's objection. Williams's objection is that utilitarianism is too simple. It ignores many complexities, many aspects of the moral life. That is Williams's idea. So at the beginning of his long critique of consequentialism, he takes a quote from Nietzsche as a kind of motto. And what does the quote from Nietzsche, this German philosopher, say? The quote says, "If we possess our why of life, we can put up with almost any how. Man does not strive after happiness, only the Englishman does that." So it's kind of a dig at utilitarianism at the same time that it's a dig against the English, not least because well-known utilitarians such as Bentham, Mill, and Hare are Englishmen. So what is Williams's problem with utilitarianism in a nutshell? If we can compress all his criticisms in one sentence, this is like several pages of criticism, oversimplifying a bit, Williams's objection is that utilitarianism is too simple. It ignores many important considerations. It looks at actions committed by people and it only looks at the outcome. It ignores other things. Right? So William says, if you want to really object to utilitarianism, don't look at their answers to questions. Look at the things that they ignore and show that the things that they ignore are equally important or even more important than the consequences that they value very much. So from the Nietzsche quote, human beings can put up with a lot of things. They do not strive after happiness. The implication is that human beings strive for meaning, a meaningful life. It may be miserable, but usually human beings can bear some misery if they think there is a sense to it. So they would rather have a meaningful life than a happy one if the happy one is not tied to certain important elements of their personal integrity. Right? We will have reason to go back to Williams's objection to utilitarianism later when we go to our third theory, which is Kantian deontology. And Kantian deontology deals with autonomy or the ability of a human being to be self-determining, to be a law unto herself. So this being able to choose how to live, what to live for, seems to be very distinct from pursuing happiness, is the point that Williams shares with a Kantian, although Williams is not exactly a Kantian himself, but we'll not deal with labels like that just now. We are going to go into the next objection to utilitarianism, the next critique of consequentialism, which comes from Philippa Foot, among others. So virtue theorists, Philippa Foot is a virtue theorist. Virtue theorists point out that there is no simple mechanical way to make ethical decisions. Right? So even when you have a principle or a formula, an act is right if and only if it follows a set of rules, or the set of rules that would be an ideal utilitarian code, right? Or something like that, or follows the greatest happiness principle. There's no simple way to apply that. Even when we apply the greatest happiness principle, or if we apply rule utilitarianism, we need to know how to use them properly. So this is the ability to know what to do with an ethical principle, even if your ethical principle is the GHP, that takes primacy. So that ability, that acquired skill to know what to do with the moral principle, that takes primacy, and we can call that virtue. virtue is the ability, the uncodifiable ability that a person acquires, like a skill, so that she knows how to apply ethical principles to cases. And the implication is that there is an improper or mistaken way of applying ethical principles. And sometimes, again, going back to your midterm paper, that has something to do with mistakes in reasoning. And sometimes the mistake in reasoning comes from not having had experience in thinking in this way about moral issues. That's easily remedied by getting practice, right? But the idea here is we must focus on something that's beyond just the principle that looks at consequences. We must look at the ability of a person to know what to do with the moral principle so that she does the right thing at the right time to the right person in the right manner. Right? That combination of things is what virtue is. And in the next recording, I will talk more about virtue. So that's it for the introductory part of this lesson.